About 15 seconds. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Bobby Dizzle podcast. Remind everybody to subscribe and follow me, watch me, and listen to me at bobbydizzle.com. Always social media, audio podcast, and everything else. Let's get to the show. Today we have Paul Smith, United States Army veteran, remote viewer, and participant in the Defense Intelligence Agencies. Isn't it the DIA, the Project Stargate? Is it Project Stargate or Stargate Project?
It's, well, you can call it anything you wanted. The Stargate program is technically how it's
based out of
and
Fort Meade,
remember,
Maryland.
that's 2 words: star and gate. People get
it's a space in it.
Yeah,
it's not like the movie Stargate.
Exactly. In fact, we had the name before there was a movie.
Oh yeah, like 20 years. And that was in 1970s and 78 in Fort Meade, Maryland.
Well, we actually adopted Stargate in 1990 as a name. So it's a code word, right? So it's like, but it had earlier names. It started off as Scan8, and then it became Grill Flame. There's others in between, but then it became Center Lane, and then Sunstreak, and finally we adopted Stargate. It turned out being the last name for the program. So
I saw there was one before it started with a G. You might have just said that.
That was Grill Flame.
Yeah. Grill Flame. Yeah, that's right.
Well, there's also Gondola Wish, but that was very short.
Yeah, I knew it was weird. It was like a weird little name. So we got here. So everybody in the chats. Anyway, I've been looking in, since I found out about you on the Joe Rogan. I'm not going to keep talking about the Joe Rogan show. That's just how I got to know you inadvertently. But when it comes to the remote viewing, I've often, I look into the ability. What exactly do you look to see that is not a false positive whenever you start trying to do it? That's a weird question.
I think I know what you mean by the question. So
yeah.
So let's start off as, first of all, remote viewing is, of course, a consciousness-based skill. It's a form of extrasensory perception. And in fact, I often will refer to it as a sort of a disciplined form of clairvoyance. That's a sort of sloppy way of explaining it, but it's good enough for a rough and ready kind of way of saying it. So it being a form of extrasensory perception, it's all mentally mediated, and it gives you the ability to actually perceive and ultimately report data and experiential information that you derive from targets, locations, people, places, things, even events, different distance in time, that you should have, according to science, have no access to, right? And yet it works. So, but there is a big problem in determining what it is that your mind is making up. We have this thing called mental noise that everybody has going on all the time. It's not just the ESP thing. It's all the racket that's going on in your heads, like guesses, speculations, memories, thoughts, random ideas and stuff that flow through your mind all the time. That stuff can get in the way of remote viewing because it is always going on, and sometimes it's hard to sort out what the actual signal is from, what you're picking up about the target that's real, as opposed to this mental noise, this racket that's going on in your heads all the time. And part of what you learn when you learn remote viewing is how to generally distinguish between the noise and the signal so that you can capture that signal and report it so it becomes of use to somebody.
All right. Yeah, it's every time I try to do something like that, I always think of like random things that have nothing to do, that couldn't possibly be. Like I'll think of like it's really specific and it's true, but every time I do it, I think of Abraham Lincoln, and I have no idea why. That name comes to the top of my head.
I know why. It's because you watch Men Who Stare at Goats.
Really?
Well, in Men Who Stare at Goats, this guy tries to do remote viewing, and the target turns out to be the statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Monument sitting in his throne, and so that's the that is the joke there, that the guy talks about. I see a guy sitting in a chair, and poof, the guy, is it George Clooney pulls out the image that he's supposed to be remote viewing, and it's Abraham Lincoln sitting in that sculpture of him sitting in a throne. So that
Well,
maybe
it's funny
that's
because
where.
I've never seen that movie.
Oh no, you're being psychic already. You're being psychic and being wrong.
You just freaked me out a little bit, man. Because what if like I've seen like the part where it starts out and they get all gathered up, but I've never seen like it all the way through, and that's
Well,
crazy.
you'll
Since
have
I've
to
been in
watch
fourth
it.
grade.
It's an amusing movie. It's not very accurate at all, but it is amusing. I got a kick out of it. So
Now, is that anything? Is that based off of your bunch, or is it different?
it's very, very, very loosely based off of what we did. It's got a bunch of other stuff thrown in that we had nothing to do with, but they lump it all together in the movie. It comes from a book called The Men Who Stare at Goats, and that's what the book did. It kind of hoovered up a whole bunch of sensational stories that they ran around and collected and threw them all together partly about the Stargate program, partly about other things. And so, yeah, again, it's not very accurate. In fact, it's very low accuracy level, but it is an entertaining story. So I don't
imagine that
from seeing it.
Hollywood inaccuracies.
Exactly.
Well, when the Hurt Locker came out, I worked out on the bomb range when they were here in town with the EOD soldiers, and I have an AV booth, basically a little theater made out of connexes, and those EOD techs came out there and ripped that movie to shreds.
Yeah,
I was like, I'd hate to be in the IMD of that movie because they just got plowed.
Well, you got to kind of give them benefit of the doubt because a lot of stuff that you do in the military doesn't really carry through on the screen very well.
It's all kind of sluggish and boring too.
Oftentimes, as I said, hurry up and wait, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? Combat is like hours of boredom, punctuated by a few minutes of terror, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so, that's why I'm feel kind of charitable towards Men Who Stare at Goats, because I know it's really totally wrong, but they had to make it an interesting and an exciting movie. And watching somebody remote view is like watching paint dry.
It's like watching somebody just sit there, just looking at them.
Yeah,
I find it fascinating that the particular remote viewing was actually given credit by the government, because the first thing they always do is say everything's hogwash. The government does, and to acknowledge it, something like that, it makes me wonder what else they're hiding. If that is something to acknowledge they did, what are they hiding that they didn't do?
And sometimes people always want to know government secrets, but a lot of government secrets are also quite tedious. But there are probably some things out there that would be very interesting, very exciting to find out the government's hiding. But I won't say it's always hiding stuff for a good reason. Sometimes it's got bad reasons, but quite often they're hiding stuff for good reasons, and people don't give them credit for that.
Oh yeah, you don't want the Ruskies to see some of the stuff.
Yeah, or somebody, for example, they don't publish the plans for hydrogen bombs for a very good reason. You don't want Joe Hezbollah to get a hold of those plans and figure out how to build his own hydrogen bomb.
I get asked on here all the time if I'm on a show that maybe have like a conspiracy element to it when they find out I've worked for the Army for like 20 years.
Yeah.
They're like, have you heard anything that's concerning? I'm like, everything that I've heard that's in that category is boring and very, very just technical to the nth degree. And that's the reason it's secrets. I'm like, it's not the Hollywood fairy tale you think it is, being behind the scenes.
Yeah. True enough.
Yeah. Sit there, somebody, and I'll watch these events go on where they talk about things, and I'm like, and somebody once told me that did it with me. If you put a gun to their head, they couldn't tell you one thing that was said out the window.
That's the thing. They want me to tell them secrets, and I, frankly, first of all, secrets are often they have a wear out date, right? After a few years, a secret isn't nearly as sensitive as it used to be. But also remembering the actual details of stuff. I mean, I worked with some pretty highly secret stuff at DIA. Had nothing to do with remote viewing or anything else. Had to do with national intelligence collection systems, and of course that's really the golden goose that the Russians would love to get a hold of, and the Chinese. But that was now 30 years ago ish, and that stuff's outdated technology, and I don't remember any details about it anyway. Really,
nope, not a bit of it.
Yeah,
I would shoot the videos of those soldiers training to go to Iraq with the EOD techniques,
Mm-hmm.
and I would save it for a highlight reel of my resume. And I got to thinking about it. Somebody said, you may not want to broadcast that you have that because it's tools and techniques. But now looking back, that was like 07, and it's probably outdated to the nth degree by now.
Problem is, there's still probably stuff that is sensitive.
Oh yeah. I think I took out the stuff that was tools and just used like the little cuts and edits I did to make it look like a cool video for them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because they had to clear the damn thing before they took it with them anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Always a protocol guy in the wings ready to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now when you did the remote viewing, I guess they wouldn't. I was almost going to ask you if you ever had to look at anything like the Kennedy assassination, but I don't think they'd put you on that.
No. First of all, you don't do domestic kind of targets in a foreign intelligence collection program. It's not interesting. The second thing is, as far as the government's concerned, that's all been settled, right? It's only the people out there in the conspiracy world that think it hasn't been.
They don't need you telling them who killed Kennedy.
No, and I have lots of conspiracy theory friends. I have lots of conspiracy theory people who aren't friends, right? Okay. They're all looking for conspiracy, and yeah, there's probably conspiracies here and there, but the very fact that we don't necessarily know everything instantly, they often turn it into a conspiracy, and there's probably not really a conspiracy there. It's just a lack of information, right? Mm-hmm. The Kennedy thing, that's a little bit different sort of a deal, because there are some semi-legitimate speculations as to what exactly happened. I mean, it does seem incredible that one guy could have carried that whole thing out, although it isn't impossible. I mean, if you think about it, lots of other strange things have happened in the world that are very clearly just done by one person, and so it's not impossible he did, but the connections are what's weird in the Kennedy thing, like the fact that he lived in Russia, in the Soviet Union for a while, and the fact that Jack Ruby comes in, who had no link to him or Kennedy, comes in and assassinates the assassin. I mean, those kind of things are odd. They're definitely odd, and so
a lot of dominoes fell.
Well, I don't know if they're dominoes or not, right? Yeah. The only way you know they're dominoes is if you can trace all the dominoes back to the first one that gets pushed over, and these have not. I think that they're weird. They're weird things that really have been answered, but maybe not in a satisfactory way. Now, ultimately, maybe that's all there is to them. We don't know. There are obviously, I won't say obviously, there are other, I'm sure, conspiracy-based things that maybe are real and we haven't got the bottom of. Right?
You know my favorite one? Have you heard the one about the Secret Service man that like tripped behind him and shot Kennedy with his own rifle?
Are you serious? Is that a conspiracy thing?
It was on a show on Netflix. It was the whole Netflix show was about it.
Well, there's credibility for you. Netflix show, right?
That's like citing the Wikipedia in your paper in college.
See, that's an absolutely ridiculous theory, because if you think about it, if that could be proved, then all of this other conspiracy theory stuff goes out the window, right? So you'd think the government would be, I won't say eager. Nobody wants to, come up with a solution for why the president was killed. But I mean, that would be a very obvious thing. And if that was really what happened, it would certainly totally rule out all these other things. But that's the first time I've heard that. I think that's somebody just looking for a way of making a name for themselves in the conspiracy world. Frankly.
It was like the Secret Service agent was supposedly hungover, and he was holding his rifle without trigger discipline, and he hit the brakes and went and shot it.
Well, that doesn't even sound like something could happen physically. That's ridiculous. No one's carrying a rifle while they're driving a car. That's silly.
It was a reach. It was like he was the one sitting in the back. He was like holding on to the side. It was a whole thing. It was.
Oh, and they did not have Mannlicher Carcano 6.5 millimeter rifles either.
Nope.
They were armed with something much more American, right?
Yeah, they had like a 223.
Yeah, this was 63. I don't think they would have been if they were carrying rifles, which I doubt they were.
Maybe an M14, something like that.
Yeah, an M14 or even a Garand back then, an M1, but or a carbine or something. But I don't recall any pictures from back then of Secret Service people carrying rifles. Certainly handguns, maybe submachine guns.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't recall any of them carrying rifles. Now, of course, I didn't see every picture there was, or I didn't see every Secret Service one. But that's just that's just such a weird and implausible theory.
Yeah, it
It's
was
not even. It's worth making fun of. It's not worth really talking about seriously.
It was out there. They were. It was like a whole show.
People turn anything into a conspiracy, and part of that's one reason why some conspiracies actually succeed is because there are so many of these false conspiracies out there that it's a whole lot harder to believe one that turns out to be real, So
yeah, and like you said, that Carcano bow, it's really specific. It doesn't look like anything else.
Yeah,
long and rounded at the end.
Yeah.
Those are the weirdest guns. My friend used to deer hunt with one.
Yeah.
Like, where did you even find this?
Yeah, well, back then you could buy them for $25 off the back of the gun magazine, or even 15. There was a time when you could buy Lee Enfields for I remember about $15. Jungle carbine was about 25. And now they sell for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I wish I bought a whole room for them. You could be 5 years old and send off and get a gun. That's what people talk about today. They say, "Oh, it's so easy to get a gun." Well, back in the 60s, it was way easier than it is today. There was no limit on age. You could if you could scrape together $15-20 plus $1.50 shipping, you could get a surplus military rifle, and lots of my friends had them. So.
And now you got to fill out a form.
Oh yeah, and if you're under 18, is it 18?
Yeah.
It is 18.
It's 18.
Yeah, under 18 or for 21 for a handgun, you can't have one. Well, you can't have one, and you certainly can't buy one, except maybe on the black market, and then it's illegal. It's an illegal transaction to buy a gun if you're 18 years old, unless you're 18 years old.
Mm-hmm. So. That's when I bought my first one. Not the first gun I owned, but the first gun I bought.
Well, I bought my first gun when I was 14, but there was no law against it at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That was the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah, no laws there.
Well, I think we're on a tangent. Where are we supposed to be?
I don't know. Hey, this is a podcast.
Yeah.
That's how we roll. Talking about the Kennedy assassination, yada yada yada. We're talking about bacon. It's just that's how it happens. Mm-hmm. We got our meat box in right before this podcast started, so I had to rush and put that in the freezer. We get it by the mail.
Hence the reference to bacon. Okay.
Yeah, gotcha. Everything goes back to bacon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about the. You mentioned the first. No. The test you took to get into the program. What was that sort of like? How did they measure your aptitude?
Well, there was a group of tests. So first off, let me set the stage for this. So I had joined the Army in 1976 to be an Arabic linguist. I'd gone to language training after basic training. I'd learned Arabic, gone on to electronic warfare training and all that stuff. And I ended up at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne as an intelligence NCO. I was a sergeant by then, intelligence NCO, Arab linguist. And they put us to work washing Jeeps and changing oil in Gamma Goat trucks. And that's because we didn't really have a mission at the time, and we weren't at war in the Middle East and all that. So I'm thinking there's got to be something better to life than just washing Jeeps and changing oil as an Arab linguist. And one of my friends one day said, well, I enlisted to get Arab language training and then to go to officer candidate school. Why don't you come around and we'll do the application process together? So I went around with him and I got accepted to officer candidate school. So I went off to Fort Benning and I became a second lieutenant and ultimately ended up in Germany with the Special Forces DED as one of their intelligence staff officers. And then over time, came back, went to school and ended up at Fort Meade, Maryland, working as a Mideast desk analyst. And it was kind of tedious. It was kind of a bookkeeping job. I won't go into the details because even the details aren't very interesting. What I didn't know, I had moved in next door to the operations and training officer for the remote viewing program and across the street from one of their current remote viewing trainees. The ops and training officer was Skip Atwater. We call him Fred back then. Skip Atwater. Across the street was Tom McNair. And I was trying to figure out what they did, because Tom always wore civilian clothes, and as did Skip, and Tom had a full beard. And yet on his door it said Captain Tom McNair. I go, what the heck? So I kept trying to figure out what they did. And, on Fort Meade, everybody did intelligence work, right, for the most part. It was either signals intelligence, that was the big thing, but then also human intelligence. That's the normal kind of spy stuff. Might be imagery intelligence, all that stuff. And I asked these guys, well, what kind of intelligence do you do? Emit, SIGINT, or HUMINT? And they said, well, none of them.
Option D.
What? Anything else, right? No, there's MASINT, but they didn't do that either. And I said, what do you do? They said, we can't tell you. I said, okay, all right. And then one day they come and knock my door, and they say, we think you might be good at what we do. And I said, what do you do? And they said, we still can't tell you. But we're going to give you a set of tests that we want you to take. And if you score where we think you're going to, then we will read you on and give you the opportunity to volunteer for our program. I said, okay. And then I later found out why they knocked on my door, other than being friends. But it's because they were looking for recruits to be trained in remote viewing. It turned out that you needed someone who was competent in his military career, his or her military career, good report cards, all that kind of thing, but then had an added thing that most Army officer didn't have, some kind of creative pursuit. It turns out that creativity is an indicator of remote viewing talent, right? So I use that word talent carefully, because we won't go there right now, maybe later. So I had not only, of course, been in the Army for several years, but I was also, as you can see, some of my artwork on the walls behind me. Actually, when I'd gone to Brigham Young University, I majored in art. I illustrated textbooks and science papers and stuff, put myself through school. I like to write fiction. I had been playing guitar for about 20 years by that point, I'd say. What else? Then I was fluent in one language and competent in two others at the time. And languages was one of the indicators of using other part of your brain in your standard.
The Arab one, Arabic studies.
Yeah, and German and Hebrew. I had some background in all of them. So they kind of thought, well, we can't not try this guy out. He may not be any good, but he's got the indicators. We might as well give it a try. So I took the tests, and they were standard psychology, personality profile, Myers-Briggs. A lot of people know about Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs was one of them. The MMPI was one. There's a couple of them. I'm blanking right now what they were, and then a couple of specialty ones that were created by the Army Intelligence Security Command's staff psychologist. And I scored where they expected me to, I guess, because they took me over to the office and sat me down. And it was a Skip. And you have to remember, he's there in his jeans and button-down shirt and full beard. He's saying, we collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology skill or discipline known as remote viewing. We're asking you to volunteer to become a psychic spy. And so that's how I got into the program.
I just wondered, like, what was the prereqs you just explained to me? Like, how would they see somebody who might be good at this? It just seems so random.
Well, yeah, you have to realize this was 1983. The program essentially was started by the CIA in 1973. CIA had gotten out of it a few years later, but had been passed on to the Department of Defense. Okay, and so it was being researched at a big government think tank, originally called Stanford Research Institute, because it was owned by Stanford University. It got spun off, became SRI International. And it was huge. It was doing back then $300 million a year in government contracts, and supporting a lot of it in the intelligence world, but also other communications and stuff. So when the program got started, SRI did a bunch of research. And one of the things they discovered was that, generally speaking, anybody can be a remote viewer. But people who have a creative side to them tend to learn it more easily. And so their experience was, and they'd already trained by that time 6 or 7 military personnel. And the ones that had done the best tended to be the ones who had some kind of creative thing. Like one of them was Mel Riley. He was really good at doing Native American art. He'd actually been literally adopted into a Native American tribe. When I say there's a lot of people around here who say they've been adopted, he really was. He really was. He'd been adopted, gone through an adoption ceremony, all kinds of stuff with his local Native American tribe. And at the moment, I'm forgetting what the tribe was. But he like grew up with the chief's son. He knew all of their ceremonies, and he was really good at doing his own version of Native American art. It was beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. Another was Joe McGonigal, who actually was quite a he was into doing art on the side, and he was very successful as well. I'm sorry, you said something, and
I said so. He was naturally creative. He had
Wes, absolutely
definitely had that trait.
Absolutely. And so they saw I was also had this creative side to me, and so they thought, well, okay, let's see how it works out. And it did. I was in the program for 7 years. The entire time I was a captain in the Army, I was a psychic spy for the U.S. government. So
that's pretty intense. Like it's like the 70s and the 80s, and I was a history minor in college, and so I know in Alabama, so I know about Civil War. I know about the Romans and that era, but what was the big fascination with the Middle East that time? In that time, it was the
my
Iran
fascination
Contra
with it.
Not just the army's, but the military's fascination.
Oh well, the Middle East has always been strategically extremely important in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Israel, of course, we're their main ally, and they were our only ally in the Middle East, really, because at that time Egypt and Syria were both allied with the Soviet Union. People don't realize that, but that's the case. Iraq was as well. And so Israel is kind of the stalwart of democracy in the Middle East. But I mean, that's where the oil is, or back then, particularly where most of the oil was. It's been, we found in other places, today much more than we do back then.
Forgot about oil.
The big one. And the Suez Canal. I mean, it's the key transit point between the Mediterranean and the the Central and South Pacific. So it's always been an extremely important region, even going back into ancient times.
Definitely. Then,
in a way, it's the center. That's why I call it the Middle East, because back centuries ago, it was considered to be the center of the world before the Western Hemisphere was really known and explored.
That's where it all started.
Yeah,
the Middle East. Yeah, I was thinking. Surely the Iran Contra wasn't that big a deal. They needed an entire unit dedicated to the Middle East psychic spying. I guess that makes sense.
Well, I mean, we weren't just dedicated to the Middle East. I mean, our targets included the Soviet Union, the whole entire Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, China, even Pakistan when they were working on their nuclear program. To some degree, Africa, not to a great extent because it wasn't as important back then as it has turned out to be now. Basically the whole non-U.S. world at one time or another. There was some target in some country that they needed addressed. So,
what about success stories? Like, what in your personal case, or maybe in your team, what kind of success stories did you have that could be confirmed?
Well,
what would be considered a success? Sorry, what could be considered a success?
Now, here's one of the problems in the intelligence world: is if you produce accurate information about a given intelligence target, but it's information that either doesn't make a difference to policy or is something that they already knew, then you haven't done them any good, right? And so sometimes we might remote view a target and we produce information that's totally accurate. And let me explain what it means here a little bit, remote view. So when you remote view, you have to be at least blind to the target, usually double blind. What that means is the viewer cannot know what the target is. And there's reason for that. If you know what the target is, of course, the first thing is skeptics say, well, you just already said stuff you already knew, right? But the real reason is it screws up your remote viewing if you know what it is, because everything you knew or could speculate about it or could guess about it, all that stuff's in your head. And what you believe about the target may totally be different than what they need to know about the target. And so all that stuff gets in the way and messes up your data. So it's important the viewer is blind to the target so they don't start guessing, right? They let the data come in, they act like a conduit and get it out, and it's more accurate that way. Um, and that's a very important reason. You want double blind because you don't want the person, any people who are working with you, to accidentally telegraph information to you in a non-psychic way, because that messes things up too. And so you're blind to the target. The person who's working with you is blind to the target. But then you're asked to remote view a target that you're blind to and provide information that's accurate. Okay. So the fact that you produce information that's true about the target is a miracle. I'll use miracle quotes around here, is a miracle in and of itself. But if that information isn't useful, then the CIA or INSCOM or whoever it is you're doing it for, it doesn't do them any good. So they don't care. Right. You're being successful psychically. You're not being successful in intelligence work. Now, all that said, we had a lot of those. And we had another set of successes that were of no use because the intelligence world didn't believe us. Okay. So the classic story is Joe McMoneagle and Hartley Trent, another one of our early viewers. They were tasked to remote view what was inside of a Soviet building, this massive building. It was long enough to hold 1.5 of our aircraft carriers. That's massive. That's really big. They were tasked to remote view what was inside of it because something was going on in there, and the National Security Council had no idea what it was, but it was in a Soviet shipyard, and we were afraid they were building a new aircraft carrier, the first fleet-sized carrier the Russians ever built. Well, it turned out they weren't. Joe and Hartley described this massive submarine. In the terms they described it was multiple times bigger than the biggest submarine we'd ever built. They described it with the missile tubes in front of the superstructure on the sub, and that was dismissed. The experts, submarine experts, and there's no way you'd put missile tubes in front of the superstructure on the sub. There's just no way you'd do that. Anyway, to describe this whole thing. Well, so the data went up. They sent the data upstream to National Security Council, and it was dismissed by Robert Gates, who ultimately became the Secretary of Defense and the director of the CIA many years later. It was dismissed, but 8 months later, the Russians launched the Typhoon submarine. And the Typhoon submarine was many times, well, I won't say many, but significantly larger than the biggest submarine we ever launched up to that time. And it had its missile tubes in front of the superstructure, just like Joe Hartley described it. Yeah. So that was a success. It just wasn't believed, right? Now, we did have other successes that were believed and action was taken. One of them was, let's see, what would be a good one here? So let's talk about the MX missile program. You remember it affected policy. In that respect, it was a success. Remember the MX missile being developed under the Carter administration, and the goal was they wanted to base it in the U.S. and set it up in such a way that they had this kind of shell game idea where they had multiple shelters, and then they moved the missile from shelter to shelter to shelter, so the Russians would never know exactly which shelter it was in. So if they're going to try and do a counter-strike attack in which you try and take out the enemy's weapons, that would have been the Russians were trying to take out our missiles, right? They would never know exactly where the missile was, so they'd have to shoot many times more missiles than they had to guarantee that they hit all of our missiles. And so that was deemed to be a solution to the how to keep the Russians from blowing up our missiles question, right? But then the Carter administration had a whole program, a red team, blue team kind of thing, where they were trying to see if there's any way at all the Russians could locate our missiles. And so one of the techniques they did is they would glue little radio transmitters to the back of cockroaches and turn them loose, because the idea is cockroaches go where it's warm. The shelter the missile is in is going to be warmer than the other shelters, and the cockroach will then, show you where the missile thing. And, that was one of the more ridiculous ones. I don't think that it really had much of a chance of working, but still, that shows you the lengths they went to. Well, one of the things that again, their contact with the National Security Council suggested is that they try and use remote viewers to see if they could locate missiles in a shelter. And so they created a simulation, ran some remote viewers on it, did the statistical error correction program on it and everything else, and they were able to identify the correct shelter 100% of the time. And that was briefed to Carter. And Carter, that was one of the main factors in Carter canceling the shelter, the multiple shelter system in the MX missile program, which was actually a relief to Nevada and Utah because they're going to put all those shelters out here. That would mean, like, if the Russians did try and take out our missiles, it would pretty much obliterate Utah and Nevada. And of course, both states did not want that here. And so they were very happy when Carter canceled the program.
So the remote viewers predicted that the Russians could find it, or the remote viewers found it every time?
Well, the remote viewers found it every time, which means the Russians, who we knew had a program. And I should say Soviets because it was the Soviets, but you know what?
So, yeah.
The Soviet Union was mostly Russian anyway, when you get right down to it. But because the Russians had a program, the fact that our remote viewers could do it meant that they had a very high likelihood of their remote viewers doing it. And so that essentially negated the program.
Yeah.
And for
you meant the Russians had a remote viewer program. That's where I lost you for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Russians had their own remote viewers.
Yeah. And for a long time, skeptics said, no, Carter never based his decision on that. That's just ridiculous. But Ed May, who was a leading scientist in the program and ultimately led the program for the last half of its existence, the research part of it at SRI and then at SAIC, Ed May actually got a copy of a letter that John Warner, let me think now. I'm blank on the names here in the relationships, but I think it was Senator Warner, sent to Carter detailing this, or I should have looked this up, but I didn't intend to tell the story, so I haven't gone back and refreshed my memory on it. But at any rate, it certified that Carter, in fact, did see the results, and it did influence his decision. So there's actually documentary evidence that Carter, that this particular project influenced a major policy decision in the U.S.
That doesn't shock me. Didn't Carter have like an alien encounter? I mean,
he is observed a UFO. I don't know the details of that. I haven't seen much about it, but he did admit that he had observed a UFO of some kind. Didn't know what it was, but he'd seen it. So
was he the one that got pissed off about swamp gas, or was that Reagan?
I don't know anybody.
One of them got really mad about swamp gas. I think it might have been Reagan. It's like, it's not swamp gas.
Well, Reagan actually had a astrologer. He did get some advice from an astrologer. So
he's the one the blue beam people always quote whenever they go on that tangent.
Okay, I don't know that story. You have to tell me about it.
Yeah, blue beam is the conspiracy theory of fake alien invasion to bring everybody together, start the New World Order.
Oh.
And they always quote, Reagan gave a speech that's something like, what would the world be like if we all had a common enemy?
Oh.
If aliens invaded right now, what would the enemies be like? And everybody's like, "Hey, starting blue beam." That's what they always quote.
Okay. All right. Well, that's another thing that I'm not.
Well, he wasn't talking. It was totally out of context when they say it, but that's what they'll go to that. Have you ever seen the Bill Clinton? Whenever they found a meteorite, they thought had bacteria in it, and there was a quote about it. Dan Brown wrote a book about NASA faking an alien discovery in the Arctic, and they put Bill Clinton's quote about that be the greatest discovery of all time. And
you do Bill Clinton really well.
I know that just came out of nowhere. Wait till you hear my Don Knotts. It's insane.
I can probably wait.
Yeah, you'll be just fine. Don't put it on your bucket list or anything.
Okay.
But you said when you were double blind, so in the room, how did they get you started on the subject if you didn't know what you were looking? That's a question.
You can't say, I always use these Eiffel Tower as an example of a practice remote viewing session, right? So you can't say to the student, you can't say, okay, remote view the Eiffel Tower, because then they're not blind anymore, right? So how do you get them there? And we use these days, well, back in the old days, let me go back even to the more old days. When they first started off, one of the techniques they used was called an outbounder. And what they had a whole whole database full of possible targets generally within the vicinity of where SRI was doing their experiments, right? And they would randomly select a target for what they called the outbound or beacon team. And how it's set up is you had a beacon team, 1 or 2, usually that's all people, and then you had the viewer, and the viewer was locked up in a secure room, so the viewer could not know at all where the outbound team went, with an interviewer who also didn't know where. And then they would select a target, gives the beacon team, and the beacon team would then go to that location, and they do it in such a way there's no way the viewer could see where they went or know where they went or anything. And then the viewer's task was to home in on Bill and Sally or whoever the beacon team were, home in on them, use them as a beacon and then explore the area in which they were, right? They called that an outbounder, and that seemed fairly straightforward. They were just projecting their consciousness to find these 2 people who they knew, and then when they found these people, then they would find where they were. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, really. Except for that, we don't know how they found them, right? Yeah, and there's a lot of things about remote viewing we don't know how they work. We just know that they do because they've worked many, many, many times, right? So then they started using geographic coordinates, and they'd have them, give you the coordinates, and then the viewer would go to mentally go to the location start describing. There was 2 problems with that. The first one was actually 3 problems with that. The first one was that the critics would say, well, they just memorized what's the end of all the coordinates. You give them a coordinate, they already know it's there. Considering that there was actually practically billions of possible coordinates on the surface of the Earth.
You can't memorize a coordinate.
You could memorize what was there, but that would be more of a miracle than remote viewing is, right? So
it defeat the purpose, essentially.
The second problem is, how do you task a remote viewer on something you don't know where it is, right? If you have to have geographic coordinates, then you can't target them on a hostage victim or a mobile missile system or anything like that. So how do you do that? Well, okay. And the third problem was that after a while, even if they didn't memorize what's the end of the coordinates, they tended to recall, they tend to get used to where different coordinates were. So, for example, we did a lot of Soviet Union targets. After a while, you get to where you know that a coordinate is in the Soviet Union somewhere. But the problem is that makes it harder to remote view because you start thinking Soviet Union, snowdrifts in Siberia, wolves howling on the steppes, large groves of pine trees, and yet the target might actually be in Moscow, downtown Moscow somewhere, right? And so it actually got in the way of remote viewing. So they came up with a thing they called back then encrypted coordinates. It's just essentially an arbitrary number. You assign an arbitrary number to the task. And I'll tell you how I think that works in a minute. So you assign this number, and I like to use 8675309 because that doesn't mean anything to you, huh?
Oh, yeah, just a song lyric.
There you go, 8675309, right? So 8675309 equals remote view the Eiffel Tower, okay? So you, the viewer, don't get the remote view the Eiffel Tower. What you get is 8675309. And then your subconscious has to go out into the universe and find out what that number is linked to. So
you're kind of decrypting it subconsciously.
Well, in a way, I mean, it really wasn't encrypted. That was a fiction that they told us.
One-time pad.
Yeah, it was like Dumbo's magic feather. If we believed it was encrypted, then we were more likely to believe it is hooked up to reality, right? So, remote viewing clearly is driven by the subconscious. The research at SRI and later SAIC indicated that seemed to be very true, that the subconscious has a role in this. You just want to keep your conscious awareness out of it because that's where all the noise comes from. Okay. So your subconscious goes out, finds 8675309, finds out it's linked to remote view the Eiffel Tower, and then the subconscious gets you your perceptions there. You start describing the Eiffel Tower and sketching it and whatever, right? Without consciously having any idea what it is. There's interesting little crosswalks with subliminal perception. In fact, when they were researching remote viewing, they became well acquainted with the researchers who were doing subliminal perception research and compared notes, which helped us understand quite a bit more about the process of remote viewing. It was very helpful to recognize that. So anyway, that's how you get there. So when the person doing the tasking, and in other words, assigning the remote viewer the mission, but they aren't in each other's presence. The tasking is done outside of the awareness of the remote viewer. The tasker essentially attaches his or her intention that the remote viewer remote views the Eiffel Tower to that number. And oftentimes we'll write it down, 8675309 equals or means or stands for remote view the Eiffel Tower. And there you kind of hooked up your intention to that. So you might think of it as the remote viewer reading the tasker's mind. I frankly think it's more abstract than that, I guess. That in fact, the remote viewer just finds where the number is and finds the number and finds the intention attached to it. Maybe it involves telepathy. I don't know, but I kind of think it's more than that. At any rate, and then that gets to the target. So your one sentence question turned out to be like a whole 5 paragraphs answer. Did you notice?
Yeah, I wrote that down when you said that they were double blind. I'm like, how do you get started? So basically, the tasker puts a tulpa out there. It associates it with a random number, and you link them together.
Yeah.
Actually, a Stargate. Kind of
and it
reminds
works
me of the movie.
surprisingly well. Yeah, a mental Stargate, I guess you could say.
I'm just.
Yeah.
I was going to say the Outlander thing seems like it could be a bit dangerous for the Outlanders.
Or the Outbounders.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you're trying to do a real world intelligence collection, the idea is that we used to joke and say, well, if you had to have an outbounder or a beacon,
outbounder,
if you had to do remote viewing, if you had to have that to be successful, then if you had to send them to this Russian missile factory, you might as well just give them a camera and forget the remote viewing part, But obviously,
here, just infiltrate this.
Can't send them to,
Infiltrate this enemy base, and we'll tell you what's there.
Yeah, we won't worry about the remote viewer at that point. We'll just let you tell us.
Yeah, that's almost like being able to pick out a coordinate with your mind. It defeats the point of remote viewing. That last part with the word association, it kind of validates the entire. That's crazy how that works.
Mm-hmm.
You really got to. I mean, do you practice the ability to do that? I mean, how do you practice? I mean, obviously,
you just do sessions.
Yeah.
Somebody comes up with a set of targets. They assign you using this tasking. I call it tasking number these days rather than encrypted coordinate, because it's not really a coordinate and it's not really encrypted. There's a funny story behind how that came to be. I won't bore you with it now, but I call it tasking number because that's what the number does. It gives you it connects you with the tasking, right? And you just are given a lot of tasking numbers that have targets assigned. You do the process that of course I teach this, and you follow the process that I teach, and you end up accessing the target and producing information about it. Very, 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 very often.
And you teach it at your remote viewing instructional services there.
Yes,
I had that in the description.
Oh.
How many students do you get on average?
Well, you have to understand that my course is very specific and it's very intense. Okay, so I only teach 2 students at a time.
Oh, okay.
Now, I will have classes up to 6 students, but for every 2 students, I add another instructor, or even fraction thereof. So if I have 3 students, I'll bring in another assistant instructor. If I have 4, that one still managed. If I have 5 or 6, then I bring yet a third one. I don't go over that. I have very small classes. And so back when I was doing a class a month, because they're very intense, they're a week long, 5.5 days, literally, and they're usually a good 10 to 12 hour days for the student. It's very intense, very rigorous, and very, very effective. But as you can see, I might have, if I was doing one class a month and averaging 3 students, that's probably what the average would be. I do 36 students a year, is what it boils down to. Sometimes I'll have 2, sometimes I'll have 4, sometimes, rarely, I'll have 6. So that gives you an idea of, I have many fewer students than much my competition. My competition tends to have these large classes, 20 to 25 students, 1 instructor, 3 days over a weekend.
3 days.
They're obviously cheaper than I am. Their tuition fees are much less than mine, but you also get much less instruction.
3 days does not seem like
certainly
enough.
much less attention from the instructor. So with me, there will be an instructor working with you on every remote viewing session you do. We interact with the students all the time, very, very closely. And it's a very intense class. It is, and it's expensive, but it's absolutely worth the money. So.
I imagine so. 1-on-1, basically.
For the most part, yeah.
How long was the class? You say a month?
Starts on Monday morning, and it goes all day Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it ends usually around 1 or 2 on Saturday afternoon.
Okay, it's like a boot camp.
Oh yeah, it's like remote viewing basic training. Absolutely.
I imagine so. I took a cybersecurity boot camp for CISSP last year, and it can't be any worse than that. But I can imagine how intense it is.
Well, it is worse in the sense, not worse. It's more exciting and rigorous, because remember, this is a skill that you can't really write down everything in a book. This is something that it's something that you have to learn. You get instruction on the basics of it, and then you have to learn by your own experience, with, of course, guidance from the instructor. And so, most things, like if you're doing an electronics course, there you can have wiring diagrams, you have all the parts there, and you have an instructor says, well, you hook this up to this, and you hook this up to this, blah blah. The same thing with software, except it's with
code
programming language rather than parts. But it's all really quite well organized and restricted. But remote viewing is more like art, learning how to paint or draw, or play an instrument, where I can tell you how to do it, and you can be told how to do it, but actually bridging from being told how to do it to actually doing it is a very challenging and rewarding process.
The instrument analogy makes a lot of sense, because I used to play the trumpet. I can imagine just having to shove that in the practice and the repetition alone.
Somebody can demonstrate playing the trumpet, but demonstrating it isn't the same as you learning.
Yeah, you can't do it. Or making that noise with your mouth. Can't do it. What are these people doing with the skill they learn?
Well, and that's another question. By the way, let me grab something here.
Go ahead.
It's a copy of. Whoops, I don't want that one.
Got a bunch of psychics running around out there.
Book. Do you have one of these? I can't remember if I sent you one or not. It's my book. Figure out where the camera is. The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. Okay.
I don't think you did.
Okay,
unless I missed it.
I do have a chapter in here that tells you roughly what I'm about to tell you. Okay. People come here wanting to learn remote viewing for practical reasons. Oftentimes, they want to maybe use it in investing, and it actually has been quite successful investing. People say, "Well, if you're psychic, why ain't you rich?" And there are people actually who are making pretty good money using remote viewing in investing, sports betting, stock market, currency markets, things like that. It does give you an edge over what you normally have in normal investing strategies, if you're doing it right. Okay, some people want to help police solve crimes. Some people want to find missing kids. They got all these different practical reasons, and I don't want to dismiss those. Those are important. But I would say the majority of people, including the ones that want to use it for practical things, see remote viewing as a tool for self-actualization. And that's a familiar term in human potential world, right? Self-actualization. They see it as a way to prove that they are really more than their physical bodies, more than their brains, there's more to them than that. And it's kind of like people who parachute jump. There's lots of practical uses for parachute jumping, but many people do it not because they want to get into combat or go fight for forest fires or whatever. They do it because they're demonstrating to themselves that they can do something like that, right? And when they come to learn remote viewing, they're actually, when they first have their first success, it's just like this massive epiphany. That's one of the best things of teaching this, is you get to watch people when they blow their own minds in a way,
I imagine so.
Yeah. They have a success. They know that there's no way they could have done that unless they actually were psychic, and it's just thrilling, and it's confirmation of that idea that we aren't just meat machines like science keeps trying to tell us that we are.
I imagine when you mentioned earlier about the guy that positively identified the new submarine, like how is he not heralded as some kind of superhero?
Well, of course, at the time, the whole thing was very classified.
Yeah, well, yeah, so there's that. But that's one of the factors.
It made an impression on his life, that's for sure.
I mean, that was obviously one of the factors in the back of my mind at the time. It was just like the Enigma project. You can't tell Hitler you can't tell Hitler you had the Enigma machine.
Yeah,
because he'll just stop using it, which was very sad in the movie.
Well, one of the big problems with remote viewing is that there's no apparent way to shield against remote viewing. They tried all kinds of ways of seeing if they could do it at SRI, and to some degree, even us in the military side of the program had no success at shielding against remote viewing. So the only way to stop the other guys from remote viewing you is to take out the remote viewers. And so one of the main reasons for being so classified was to protect us.
So like assassination attempts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, does that have anything to do? I may go woo-woo on you with the Montauk chair.
I'll just slap you around a little bit.
Yeah. It's okay, because I go all different directions. I'll talk to paleontologists who are PhDs as well, and then I'll talk to people that say they flew in a spaceship. And so I kind of bounce like a ping pong.
Okay.
But does that have anything to do with you've heard of the Montauk chair and the Montauk project?
Yeah.
Russia had one.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that. Yeah.
Okay. I was making sure if it wasn't tied in, if maybe there was a similarity.
No.
But of course, that might not even happen.
So first off, if the Montauk project ever actually existed, then I think there's a lot of reason to doubt that. Even if it really existed, there was strictly a physical kind of a thing, a physics related thing. And remote viewing, near as we can tell, isn't dependent on physics. It seems to do things that physics in theory wouldn't be able to accomplish.
Yeah.
Right.
Montauk was like time travel and interdimensional stuff, wasn't it?
Well, now here's the interesting thing. Remote viewing, you can remote view into the past, and you can, to some degree, remote view into the future. Now, that's actually demonstrable. There's plenty of evidence that it does that. Other kinds of time travel, there's no evidence for. It's all speculation and anecdotal stories and stuff, right? So, if there is any kind of time travel, or at least as remote viewing has got some ability to do that, and we can show the evidence for it. Which is different than any of these other claims about time travel. So
that's crazy. It's kind of like a virtually time traveling, like you're kind of like looking.
Yeah, depending on what virtual really means in this context, it's hard to say. I'm still trying to tease out. I sort of have a model on how remote viewing into the future works. I still am trying to tease out how it works into the past, and I haven't come up with a good solution. There are all kinds of people who think they know the answer to these questions, but if you really start to drill down on what they know, you find out they don't really know it, right? Yeah. And so I'm not going to claim that I know something I don't know, right? And in this case, I don't know how it works. The future, I don't even know that, but I do have at least a kind of a speculative thing that makes sense. In the past, I haven't figured that out yet. And I probably won't ever, but
yeah. When you look into the past, I mean, obviously we already know what happened. What kind of details are you looking for in the past?
Well, I mean, we had some projects in remote viewing in the remote viewing unit to, for example, try and suss out the details or useful information from past meetings of the Politburo, in the Kremlin. How successful were we? I don't know the answer to that, because oftentimes you don't get feedback on operational projects as a viewer. And so I don't know if they were successful. And that would be something that would be kind of hard to get the details on anyway, because, I mean, to know whether you're accurate, because it's hard to get feedback from the inside of the Politburo, So
yeah.
anyway, but that's an example of something we might do is a past event. having to pump bureau. But usually we would be tasked on a past event that the tasker knew happened, but they want to know what happened, right?
Details.
Or they knew what happened, but there was an aspect of it that they didn't know and they wanted to find out. Right now, I can't give you any examples of successes in that off the top of my head, but that gives you an idea how we might use it in that respect.
That makes sense. And it seems like you saying you didn't get any feedback if they were successful or not probably falls into like the need to know category.
Like, partly. I mean, that did happen often at Fort Meade, where we remote viewed stuff that we didn't even have clearances to get feedback for. And
that's got to be terrifying for them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was, for example, the stealth program. We were asked to kind of do a counterintelligence assessment of the stealth aircraft program by remote viewing, using remote viewing blindly. See, they didn't want anybody in our office to know what the target was, because they wanted to see what Soviet remote viewers might be able to determine about the stealth aircraft program, which at that time was, hugely secret. And so they tasked us. They brought in the tasking number, and I'm not sure whether it was coordinated or not. They did not tell our operations officer. They didn't tell our project managers. They didn't even tell our commander what the target was, because we didn't have the clearances for it back then. I mean, we had top secret, special component intelligence. We had access to all that stuff, TK, that kind of stuff. That wasn't sufficient to have access to the stealth program back then. So they just brought in the tasking, and then we proceeded to produce information that was absolutely consistent with stealth aircraft, including some of the novel features and stuff of, for example, the skin on the F-117 and that kind of thing. And from reports, I didn't interact with the tasking people, but from reports of Skip Atwater and other folks who did, scared the bejesus out of them. Because they thought, if American remote viewers can do this, then that means there's at least a chance that the Soviet remote viewers can do it, and that freaked them out. So.
I mean, maybe the only line of defense there was the Soviets didn't know it existed, so they didn't know to
task. Yeah,
they didn't know to task.
Yeah, and of course that's possible. Although there were rumors there was a program like in see, what's that? Air and Space Technology. I forget the publication. It's a name like that. Widely read. There was occasional little snippets in there that the U.S. may be working on some kind of a secret aircraft that was low observable or something, but no details, obviously. Aviation and Space Technology, I think, is the name. Stuff like that we get every now and again. So I think the Russians and Soviets probably did know there was something going on. And for all we know, they remote viewed the program and got information. We don't know that. But at least our folks were forewarned because they'd seen what American remote viewers could do.
Yeah, what do sorry, I'm getting barged in here. Back to the prevention, what kind of measures did they do to prevent the remote viewing? Was like Faraday cages and cover you in lead, or what?
So they tried that at SRI. They didn't bother at Fort Meade because they'd already known that it didn't make any difference. They discovered that you could remote view from inside a Faraday cage. And it was actually, if anything, it worked better than if you were not in a Faraday cage. I think it
made it worse.
It cut down on the extra electromagnetic.
That makes sense.
Yeah. They also found out you could be outside a Faraday cage and remote view inside a Faraday cage successfully. Right. You might put an object in there and you were able to describe the object. They also found that you could remote view successfully from the bottom of the ocean floor in a research submarine. That was tried in 1976. We had two prominent remote viewers. One who is famous today is the guy who actually invented remote viewing, Ingo Swann. In fact, there's a picture of him on my wall behind me.
Is that who that is?
Over my head. That's Ingo Swann. Yeah.
I was going to ask who it was. He looked familiar.
He has a nice little saying on it and signed it for me. But Ingo Swann and Hella Hamid was the other one who people know about remote viewing. She's not a household name by any means. And they alternated putting them in the submarine and putting them really deep in the water, because seawater actually is one of the best shielding means possible. It covers frequencies that a Faraday cage doesn't cover. And so if you're successful in a deep enough submarine in seawater, that means remote viewing can't be shielded against in any physical way that we know of, right? And they were successful. They were successful.
That's all we've got.
Yeah. Well, and also you could, from deep in the earth, from a mine, like, for example, a very deep cave, that's also good shielding. And that was also tried, and it succeeded. So
there's another show that had a remote viewer on that was from Fort Meade, and I'm trying to find it without distracting from our conversation. See if you know her. And
Angela Ford?
Angela
Ford?
Angela? Yeah, I think it was Angela.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine that has a show and he had it on there. I remember her mentioning Fort Meade. I was just kind of trying to find it. Yeah, she has like a handler and an agent and everything.
Oh, you mean for media? You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
She was on a tight schedule.
Okay. All right.
I had a fire built in my backyard watching it. I said, I wonder if he knows Paul Smith. But when she said Fort Meade, I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. So I was in the program from 1983 to 1990. Okay. Angela was in the program from 1986, actually clear through to the end, 1995, middle of 95. So she and I overlapped for 4 years. So yeah, I knew her. She used a little bit different approach than we did. It was a thing we called written remote viewing. It's kind of like a combination of channeling and automatic writing. I'd say best way to describe it. She might not like that description. I don't know how else to describe it though. And she might be okay with it. I don't know. And she had some successes with that. They're undeniable that she had some successes with it. But like us, she also had failures.
Yeah.
No remote viewer is ever right every time, and that's what it boils down to. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you met the guy who's trying to pay somebody $1 million to get it all right. I've talked to 4 or 5 people. From the show.
The Amazing Randy?
Yeah, the Amazing Randy. Yeah, I was thinking.
No, I've never met him, but he's dead, by the way. He died a few years back.
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 people I've had on the show that had to deal with him. They all got one detail wrong. I'm like,
what was that?
It's just a detail. And so it has to be 100% for him to pay out.
Oh, you mean for when they tried to win the prize?
Yeah. They always got something.
What people don't know is the prize never actually existed.
Of course it didn't.
It was all promissory notes. It didn't start off as $1 million. It started off something less, and that became $1 million. But it was all promissory notes. I think towards the end of the prize being available, he might have actually gotten. I don't remember how it was, because he was sensitive to that criticism that there wasn't really $1 million prize, right? But he always kind of cooked. Put his finger on the scales in a way, and that's documented. There are people who can explain that. I don't know. I didn't make a career following much, but I do know one case. So he criticized the research at SRI and wrote a whole book about it. A couple of books. One of them was called. Well, one was called Flim Flam. I can't remember what the other one was called, but it went into great detail about how he had debunked the research at SRI. And there were a bunch of falsehoods in there. In fact, they had to have been lies. He purposely lied in his book. For example, he talked about how the experimental apparatus was set up at SRI so that it was easy to cheat. And the way he described it was not at all what it was like. And people said, well, is that what you saw when you got there? I said, oh, well, I actually never went there. He said, he never went to SRI, and yet he's writing about it as if he had, right? He claimed that the videographer who documented all of the experiments that produced such amazing results, he claimed that this guy, his name was Zev Pressler, I think his last name was, he claimed that this guy had confided to him that that they had all been reconstructed, that he never really saw any experiments. It was a total lie. Randy had never met Zev Pressler, and Zev Pressler had never said any such thing. In fact, Zev did a notarized statement and actually went on camera to totally refute everything Randy said. So Randy was not above falsifying and making things up to try and persuade people that this stuff was bogus. He was the one that was being bogus. It's very obvious. Now, in retrospect, now that we've been able to find out about all this stuff, he was just making stuff up right and left. So,
yeah, he kind of made a career out of that. He was basically a stand-up comedian.
He was a professional magician, a stage magician, but then he really kind of made his real mark in being a rabid skeptic and making all these sensationalist claims against sensationalist claims and stuff, misrepresenting stuff. That was where he made his reputation, really.
The Amazing Randy.
Mm-hmm.
He was the Flim Flam book you were talking about.
Yeah,
it was.
I can't remember the name of the other one.
Yeah. So when you do the in the history of remote viewing, I don't know why I can't think of the word remote viewing. I cannot say that word. Has there ever been any? I swear it's been all week. I've been trying to describe what my episode was about. Has there ever been any like like I said, I'll get woo woo sometimes. Cross talk between maybe the paranormal / alternate dimensions or other dimensions. I don't want to.
No,
I don't want to throw dumb questions out there. I'm just things I think about.
I think I understand your question, and not really. There are people who claim it. They produce no evidence of it. I think it's imagination, frankly.
Yeah.
So by definition, presumably you can't communicate with any alternate dimension because it's it's not this dimension, right? Now, I don't know if there really are such things. There's a lot of speculation about it. It's one of the hypotheses in theoretical physics that maybe there are alternate, not alternate, but parallel universes, I guess, essentially. In fact, certain interpretations of quantum physics require that there be an infinite number of diverging time streams and stuff. But famously, what we believe about science today, we're going to find out in the future is wrong. Right? So
50 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, that's been the history of science all along. As we start off, we have a set of theories, and the series eventually, we eventually find out that those theories are at very least incomplete and very often are wrong. I mean, the obvious one is that the geocentric version of the universe, where the Earth is the center of the universe, and we find out later, no, the sun is the center of the solar system, but we're nowhere near the center of the universe, right?
Just a speck of dirt.
That's kind of the classic one, but there's many examples of this. And so we hope our science today is better than it ever has been in the past. But if you look at the controversies in quantum physics and the uncertainties in quantum physics, you'll see that we still don't really know what we're talking about overall. In fact, there are plenty of quantum physicists who argue with each other about the solutions they're offering to be the answer to the universe. And there's huge holes in our theories, and there's lots of unsolved problems and questions, and we don't know how they're ever going to be solved. People work on it, and I think that's important. I'm glad we're working on it. And people have to theorize. They have to develop a hypothetical structure and then produce evidence to support it, which ultimately results in a theory. And then the theory, of course, serves to help promote research, and you have to do that. We get into troubles when we start getting kind of arrogant about it and assuming now we know everything.
Yeah.
We're starting to assume that our theories really are correct when they may not be. They just look correct from our perspective right now.
They look good. They look good to us in the meantime. That's why I have in my description to my show, I have the word hypothesis instead of theory, because I used to have a co-host who was a biologist, and anytime you said theory, he'd get corrected.
Well, in common everyday usage, common everyday usage, everything's a theory, right?
Yeah, it's a theory.
But there is a very important difference between a hypothesis and a theory. A theory actually has a structure that allows you to make predictions about how science experiments or science research will turn out.
Theory has no evidence.
one another. Now, hypothesis is where you have some facts that you observe, and then you try and put them together and see if you can make sense of them. Hypothesis is like a baby theory. It's like a theory that hasn't been born yet,
Yeah. The
And,
theory's been tested a little bit, got a little evidence.
Yes. And what people also don't understand is that oftentimes there'll be multiple hypotheses to try and explain the same phenomenon. Right? All kinds of different hypotheses to explain what this thing is that we observe. And ultimately, you get rid of hypotheses as you do experiments or do observations. You discover that this particular hypothesis can't possibly be the right one, and you get rid of it, right? And that leaves you free. And then you find out this other one, no, it can't be right either, and you get rid of that one. Ultimately, you narrow it down to one, and that one then becomes the core of the theory that you develop. So,
all right, yeah. So in the what was I thinking about here? So you got thousands of remote viewers out there going to school, and in your program, has there ever been any that I'm going to use a word here that I don't mean the literal meaning of the word? Has there anybody that's developed like a superpower, like the next level of remote viewing? Like the Iron Man of remote viewing? Does something everybody else doesn't?
Never, not that dramatic. Now, I have had some students come through who have just done some really remarkable, had some really remarkable successes. In fact, there's some that are at least as good or better than me, at least in some of their sessions. Okay. And I'm always happy to see somebody do better than me. I have no pride of position in being the best ever remote viewer. First of all, I'm not. We frankly don't know who that is. Some people think Joe McMoneagle is, but maybe he is, or maybe he isn't. Maybe there's somebody else out there we just don't know who actually is a better remote viewer. We don't know any of that stuff, right? So this whole thing about I'm a better remote viewer than you, or I'm the best remote viewer around, or whatever, or I'm a world-class remote viewer, that's just a bunch of nonsense.
It'd be kind of hard to prove too.
Well, it is hard to prove. It's impossible to prove. But the fact is, you should be striving. Your only competitor ought to be yourself, not somebody else. Your only competitor in remote viewing ought to be yourself. You should work hard to be better at it over time. I can't say better at it each day, because it goes up and down and up and down, and hopefully you go more up than you do down over time. But every once in a while, I'll have a student who just knocks it out of the ballpark, and I'm just totally impressed and totally pleased to see that happen. But I have not seen anybody who has become any kind of a superstar remote viewer.
Yeah, nobody just scares the hell out of you. You're like, whoa, how'd you know that?
Some of them are in their own minds.
Yeah. There's definitely that.
Remote viewers, and frankly, if you put them to an actual objective test where you control the variables and you control the access to information, they don't do any better than anybody else. So
part two of that question: do you think the ability to remote view is getting better as we go? Like, in the 60s, people played basketball and you couldn't really dunk, but now people can dunk from half court. Do you think there's like abilities are getting sharper and quicker? Is there an evolution to it? Maybe
that's kind of goes similar to the last question, but we don't have a way of measuring overall success remote viewing.
Like hard to prove.
Yeah, I can't say. I think there are more people who are getting the hang of it. One of the problems, of course, is there's also a lot of noise out there in the remote viewing community. It's kind of like the social version of mental noise, right? You have all these folks who think they know what remote viewing is and don't. They'll come into the remote viewing world and they'll bring in all their old psychic ideas to begin with. Like, some people are absolutely convinced remote viewing is just a form of channeling. It's got nothing to do with channeling, right? Some people think it's just psychic reading. In fact, they keep calling a remote viewing session a reading. It's not. It's different than that, right? They may be related, but it's different than that. And people come in and they'll say, well, I've got a better way of doing it. And they'll introduce their own version of remote viewing. No, it's not a better way. It's just a different way. And in many respects, it's often not as good. You see that quite a bit. People, and it's kind of a natural human tendency to want to try and one up everybody else, or find a niche that somebody isn't in, so you can distinguish yourself, make a name for yourself, right? You see that happen. They'll come in and they'll add stuff to other remote viewing methods, or they'll create their own method, and then they'll claim they got something better. This is the next invention of the wheel for remote viewing. Well, you find out, no, it's not. It's not any better than any other method, and oftentimes it's worse than any other method. But it's hard to measure. Now you can also tell better than worse frequently by, just general observation, but to actually have a hard and fast objective measure like statistics and stuff, that doesn't yet exist. Although one of my students, who's got a kind of a research bent to her, may well have come up with a way of doing that, and we'll see. I'm not going to go more into than that because
that'd be kind of cool.
Complicated. I'm not sure I understand it thoroughly myself, but she's working on it. So I'd love to see that, because then we could verify and validate different approaches. But
it'd be neat. If the remote viewing bunch is anything like the science I've talked to, the hotter the person saying they're doing it, the more fake they are.
That is very true in the remote viewing world. In fact, that's another thing. If people first hear about remote viewing, don't believe everything you hear out there. The more fantastic it is, the more likely it is to be false, just made up or imagination. Be aware there's a lot of misinformation about remote viewing out there. If you want to have good, objective information, basic information, then the place to go is the International Remote Viewing Association. Their website is irva.org. So International Remote Viewing Association. My website actually has a lot of basic objective information on it as well. It obviously is a commercial site. We're trying to recruit folks to take our courses and stuff. But I also have a lot of part of my mission, I've self-adopted mission is outreach. So I want people to understand what remote viewing really is, what it can do, what it has done, where it came from, that stuff. And there's a lot of bogus information out there on all of those topics that you can see on the internet. People claiming to have been in the remote viewing program who weren't. That's surprising. People say, I was in Project Stargate. No, you weren't. We know everybody's in Project Stargate, and you weren't one of them.
It'd be kind of hard to lie about.
It would be, but people do it. It's amazing. They'll try it. Some of them may be mentally ill. I don't know, but
there's a lot of that going around.
Some of them are not. Some of them are fakers, But my site is designed to also give you background besides being a commercial site.
What's your site?
And that is rviewer.com. The letter R and the word viewer. So rviewer.com.
I've got your Facebook on the description, just not that one.
That comes up first when you're searching Google. You can go there, but the information's really there. You go. The main information source is that one. I also have a YouTube channel. It's called Remote Viewing // Remote Perception.com. I mean, not .com, channel. So Remote Viewing / Remote Perception channel. And it's a little bit of an unwieldy name, but I want people to understand that remote viewing is actually a flavor of remote perception. And really, remote viewing should have been called remote perception, but Ingo Swann named it remote viewing and the name stuck. So yeah. So the YouTube channel Remote Viewing / Remote Perception. Remote Perception, and you'll find a lot of videos there. And this one, if this goes on YouTube, will this be on YouTube?
It's on YouTube right now.
Oh, okay. Well, then it'll get stuck in one of my playlists. Okay. Yeah, it'll get stuck in one of my playlists. And there's a lot of videos I've done there and stuff from other people as well. So, So those
you're tagged in it on Facebook and everything.
Okay, good. Well, and of course, let me show you the book again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not using this camera. The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. Okay. Now, point of this book, it has three audiences in mind. One is people who've just now heard remote viewing for the first time. And this book is a no-nonsense, no sensationalism overview of remote viewing, everything from how it got started to how it was used to what we know about how it works to different kinds of remote viewing that are out there, and even a couple of chapters on how to do it yourself, just a basic fundamental level of remote viewing. And so that's there for people who just find out about it. It's also there for people who've been involved in remote viewing for a while and have family and friends who think they're crazy for doing it. And this is a way they can give this to their family and friends. It won't embarrass you. I don't talk about aliens. I don't talk about all that stuff in there. It's a way to show your family and friends that you aren't crazy, that there's something legitimate to this stuff. And then it's to people who've been in the field a long time, but have holes in their knowledge, right? They may know a lot about one aspect, but nothing about something else. So I wrote that book to fill a niche in the literature. There wasn't a really good introductory book for remote viewing, and so that's why I wrote it. And it's available on Amazon, easily cool. Accessible there. So.
You give any prudence to the ESP apps? I almost called it the ESPN app, but the ESP helper apps, where you kind of sharpen your skill. It's about to show a number, and you pick the number.
So, of course, one of the main ones is by a friend of mine, Russell Targ, who was one of the SRI scientists, and that one was quite popular. And I think it probably helps. I don't know. I've not ever used them myself. I got in before they were ever existed, right? So, I'm not going to say don't try them. You see what happens. If you seem to be doing better, then great. They won't necessarily help remote viewing because they aren't aimed at remote viewing. They're aimed at just general ESP ability, right? So,
yeah, one of our common friends introduced me to that, Mr. John Russell.
John Russell.
Yeah, I noticed you were friends with him on Facebook.
Oh,
you may not know. You may not know.
I have like 4,500 Facebook friends or something.
Yeah.
I don't know them all, but okay. Well, we're common Facebook friends. That's true. Right?
I noticed we both had thousands of friends, so I was just seeing. Yeah. I was like, well, he kind of haunts the same circles I do. Mm-hmm. The woo woo clan, I call them. Mm-hmm. Those are my woo woo friends. All right, yeah. Thanks for being on. I had one more subject I didn't know. It's you can say I don't want to talk about it, but Randy and me had a podcast. He used to be my co-host back 2 or 3 years ago, and I was just messing around. And he was telling me about back in the day, his mom used to do seances or something similar.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And you can say, I don't want my reputation associated with it. And
no, I'll be like, okay. I wouldn't mind talking about it, but that takes a while. And frankly, I'm getting a little tired.
You're perfectly fine. You're perfect.
Yeah, we've been out snowshoeing all day and now I'm back and I'm kind of starting to fade a little bit. So.
Yeah, we can end it. I was going to end it before an hour and a half at least, but I just wanted to confirm that it happened. And
yeah, she did channeling. It was channeling.
Channeling. Yes, that's what it was.
Yeah, interesting. It was quite interesting, actually.
He was going to bring that up today if he came on, but he didn't. So I said, I'm not going to open the can of worms. Maybe we have a panel sometime in the future and we get into that. But he told the whole story, and we did this show, and it was 2 hours long, and it was about to end, and I brought that up, and it went another damn hour.
Did you record that?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like to see it because I only know the front end of that. I sat in on 1 or 2 of her channeling sessions and we talked about it and stuff, but I'd love to hear his side of it.
Yeah, I'll send you I'll try to find it. It's at the end of one of my episodes. I'll have to timestamp it, but I'll send it to you.
Okay.
It's pretty good. Me and him, I was kind of pissed I kept running out of guests when I was doing this back in the day because the podcast was good. It was organic. Like we got down the rabbit holes. His sons from Germany were there. It was intense, but I just ran out of guests and it got stupid. So I said, but now I haven't ran out of guests. I'm good for 3 more months.
Okay.
So I'm going the distance.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you being on, Paul. You've been sort of a bucket list guest since day one.
Well, I'm happy to help. I mean, as you can tell, I care about remote viewing. I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, it's really fun.
And I like to see people have success in their projects and stuff. So I hope you do.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Continue to have success. Let's put it that way.
Maybe one day I'll sell some merch.
Maybe.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching. We're going to end the live. Take it easy. Subscribe. BobbyDizzle.com. Thanks, Paul, once again. Paul Smith at rviewer.com. Say what?